Number 1. Alien Hominid. This game puts players into the shoes of, well, Alien Hominid, who upon having his UFO shot down by none other than the FBI, is on a quest to recover his craft and have his sweet, sweet revenge. Starting its life as a flash game on Newgrounds.com, Alien Hominid is a tough-as-nails shooter blatantly inspired by the Metal Slug games. Alien features its own unique and humorous art style, tough but fun run-and-gun gameplay replete with one-hit deaths, weapon upgrades, vehicles to commandeer, and big boss battles with patterns to memorize. Aside from its single-player campaign, Hominid also has a number of fun, unlockable minigames to play as well. And in similar Contra Metal Slug vein, it also supports 2-player co-op for fun with a friend. In typical fashion, I am actually quite terrible at this game personally, even on easy, but I still enjoy it every time I play it. This is certainly for those with a persistent gaming personality. I certainly am not one with the iron will when it comes to mastering games of this type, but still enjoy playing them, and Hominid is a good time for all types of gamers. The game's art direction certainly gives it its own unique style, but sometimes objects in the foreground can block your view, and there is quite a bit of noticeable slowdown in portions of the game. The controls are solid and the various maneuvers are easy to learn and implement in gameplay. This game was re-released on Xbox Live as Alien Hominid HD, but was also released on the Xbox in Europe, the Game Boy Advance in Europe and Australia, and the GameCube in North America. You can also still play it on Newgrounds. The developers of this game would later go on to develop the highly praised Castle Crashers. The game is still playable on Newgrounds.com and is also still available on Xbox Live with its HD remake. So get it in whatever form you can, depending on what territory you live in.
Information passes from hand to hand. Stolen, given, traded, misplaced, found. The kid who has the most marbles at the end of the game wins. Simple. My name is Andrew Sterling. My game is over.
Number 2. Cold Winter. Cold Winter follows the storyline of Andrew Sterling, a British MI6 agent captured for spying in China and set for execution, until an old acquaintance springs him from a Chinese prison and asks him to work for his private security company. Essentially, the game starts out with the same plot as Die Another Day. To best describe Cold Winter, if you took the gritty, gory, limb destruction gameplay of Soldier of Fortune and combined it with the debonair style of James Bond, you would get the formula for this darker, grittier spy thriller. Cold Winter's levels have all the gory, grimy style of Soldier of Fortune, but keeps the more objective-based format of games like GoldenEye, but also in itself has a good degree of interactivity in its levels that rewards exploration. Outside of being able to do things like open drawers and cabinets to search for items and do pointless things like flush the toilet, Cold Winter also allows players to search dead or what's left of the dead enemy soldiers for items like keys, body armor to replenish their own, and even things for your combine items, like strips of cloth, which allow Andrew to combine with other items found throughout the level to make things like Molotov cocktails. That's another really nice touch in the game. Acquiring various items in the game allows players to go into the menu and create new items. Find an alarm clock and some C4 explosives and create a timed explosive. some wire cutters and some wires, and you can create lock picks in order to pick certain locks in the level, to get extra items and etc. The game also has side objectives to complete, like finding intel documents hidden in each level. Graphically, the game looks good. It's running on a renderware engine, but the frame rate does bog down when there's too much action on the screen. There also seems to be a bit of a blur filter which shows up when playing on an HD TV that you won't notice if you're playing on a good old CRT TV. The filter can be disorienting during gameplay if you can't adjust to it. The music in the game is excellent as well. From the title theme to the level music, I really dig the tunes. The voice acting in the game and story elements is also pretty well done overall, and the sound effects seem a bit muffled but have their own pleasing appeal to me for some reason. The controls also work well. Andrew does move slightly sluggish, and you can't adjust the aiming speed like in Black. It is stuck in the developer-chosen speed, possibly to keep the frame rate at a playable level. However, the aiming still feels very accurate. The developers did a good job in setting the default. The game doesn't allow you to aim down your sights, but every gun has a zoom. And unique for the time of its release, Cold Winter uses the L3 button to allow players to sprint.
Accuracy.
When the game was online, its 8-player matches usually made for a fun time. Certainly nothing flashy by today's bloated standards of free kills and perk systems, but they made for some simple fun. They did sometimes devolve into cheap kill fests where someone would just go grab the explosive weapons for easy kills, but certainly not nearly as badly as Killzone's online matches did. All that said, the game does still offer local 4-player split-screen multiplayer with bots, which is always a great addition to any first-person shooter, especially if you have a couple of friends to come over and a multi-tap, or even just by yourself fragging bots. Bot deathmatches never seem to get old for me, and I really appreciate its inclusion into Cold Winter. The only two downsides to this game I can really think of are, for one, Cold Winter inexplicably uses over a quarter of your PS2's memory card, and I'm not sure why. Maybe the developers programmed the game to store game assets on the card, or maybe they added an online patch before the game shipped. Honestly, I can't really speculate as to why this game is a memory card hog, I just know that it is. The only other downside for some gamers out there is this game doesn't auto-save your progress, requiring gamers to save their progress from the pause menu instead. So if you're the forgetful type and forget to save your game, you could lose hours of progress. Those two small gripes aside, Cold Winter is still one of my favorite PS2 shooters, and I highly recommend it. Number 3. The King of Fighters, Maximum Impact. While not SNK's first foray into the 3D realm of fighting games, see Fatal Fury Wild Ambition on the PS1 for a previous example, Maximum Impact is SNK's first foray into the 3D realm with their beloved King of Fighters series, and is a very solid 3D fighter with 2D fighting mechanics. In fact, Maximum Impact brings King of Fighters into 3D much better than games like Street Fighter EX did for its respective franchise. King of Fighters purists might want to look away from this game with its jump to the 3D realm and its largely scaled back character selections, though it has all the characters I care about, which is a plus for me. But for those purists, there are plenty of SNK compilations and anthology-type discs in the PS2 library to quench their thirst for glorious 2D fighting, and even King of Fighters 11, which I also highly recommend. By my own admission, I have a bit of a soft spot for the King of Fighters series. During the mid to late 90s, I fell out of 2D fighters. That period of time for me was the time of the Tekkens, the Soul Blades, the Bloody Roars, the Virtua Fighters. 3D was the new thing, and having played tons of 2D fighters in the 16-bit era, I was looking to the future, which was 3D fighters for me. 2D fighters were placed in my dustbin. However, eventually I came back around to 2D fighters, picking up games like Marvel Superheroes and the Versus series, and eventually even picking up Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the Dreamcast. The only problem was, though I could get into the Versus games, I just couldn't get back into Alpha 3, despite its high praise in the reviews. Enter the year 2000 or 2001, when browsing my local Walmart, I saw a copy of the King of Fighters 99 for a mere $10 on the PlayStation. Having seen a strong review for the game in an issue of PSM, I decided to pick it up. At first, I was doing quite terrible at the game. Not that I still don't, but I realized that I was playing it all wrong. Taking the Street Fighter route of spamming special attacks, not that Street Fighter is all spammy, but that's how I played it back in the day, and giving almost no thought to the intricacies of the King of Fighters gameplay mechanics. I eventually learned the mechanics and was really impressed that the game played a lot more like a 3D fighter than I first expected. SNK had been busy over the years refining things I didn't even know were available in 2D fighters, like the ability to fast step back and forth, the ability to dodge past your opponent's projectiles, which helps against spammy opponents, and had a bigger emphasis on defeating opponents with your regular attacks as opposed to just pulling off special moves the whole time. Most fireball type moves don't even go across the screen, so the game had a bigger emphasis on close-range attacks, overthrowing fireballs at opponents. After playing this game, I was able to play the more traditional Street Fighter type games, and not just the flashy Versus type ones. I still highly recommend the King of Fighters 99 on the PS1 to any 2D fighting fans, for a very fun and surprisingly playable 2D fighter on a system that wasn't known for its 2D capabilities. I liked it so much I actually bought Evolution on the Dreamcast later. Despite my soft spot for the franchise, which brought me back to traditional 2D fighting games, Maximum Impact is still worth a look for those wanting a good blending of 3D fighting gameplay with 2D fighting mechanics. While Rival Schools is still my favorite blending of these genres, Maximum Impact certainly ranks up there with its smooth-running, tight gameplay, spot-on controls, and while not as detailed as other fighting games, good-looking visuals. This is another game that runs on a renderware engine, and it moves smoothly and looks crisp, even on the cheapy HD TV I use in my YouTube office. Maximum Impact has most of the default fighting modes you would expect, but not a team battle mode for some reason. However, it does have a challenge mode, similar to the Edgemaster mode in Soul Blade, where fighting matches and completing objectives unlocks new things in the game, which adds a good degree of extra depth to this game. I love when fighting games add extra modes like this. The only two complaints I would add against the game would be the aforementioned scaling way back on playable King of Fighters characters, sorry Andy fans or KyoClone 583 fans, and the fact that the end boss is 2D fighter end boss cheap. Oh my goodness, does fighting him ever make me so angry? So angry! Aside from that, I have a lot of fun with this game every time I boot it up. And my copy also came with a bonus DVD with behind-the-scenes featurettes.
Are you okay?
King of Fighters Maximum Impact is also available in an upgraded version on the original Xbox, known as King of Fighters Maximum Impact Maniacs, which has a Japanese language option, I would guess 480p output, and had online play when the original Xbox still had live. And I have still yet to pick up the sequel to King of Fighters Maximum Impact, known in North America as the King of Fighters 2006, and everywhere else as, well, what else? The King of Fighters Maximum Impact 2. So I actually don't know if the sequel might actually be better than the original, at least not until I pick that one up, which I plan to do sometime in the future.
Winner! Yes! Japan's best!
Number 4. Project Eden. I own 3 out of the 4 Core Design PS2 releases. As you may know, Core Design was most famous for the original Tomb Raider series. But sadly, despite their success on the PS1, they were one of those developers that just couldn't quite make a successful jump from the PS1 to the PS2. The only PS2 release I have yet to acquire of theirs is Thunderstrike. But of the other 3 I own, Hurdy-Gurdy, Tomb Raider the Angel of Darkness, and this game, I would have to say that Eden is probably my favorite Core release on the PS2, even if it can be just as glitchy as all of Core's PS2 releases. Project Eden is a squad-based puzzle action game. There are some shooting elements, however, Eden's main focus is on solving each level's puzzles by using each character's abilities in order to progress. On the plus side, not only are there quite a few split-screen modes like death matches and even races, but the single player is also up to 4 players with a multi-tap. All other players can enter the game and leave on the fly. I've never played it this way, but I bet it would definitely add to the experience. The game starts out with your 4 protagonists, members of the Urban Protection Agency, or UPA for short, being called in to investigate strange happenings at the Real Meat factory, which leads them on a journey that spans 11 lengthy, large levels, which will test their best puzzle-solving skills. This game manages to draw me in every time I boot it up, and is for the more discerning gamers out there who love a good mental challenge along with their games. As I said, the game is predominantly a puzzle-heavy game with a little action thrown in for good measure. What else would you expect from the creators of Tomb Raider? The game focuses around its 4 playable characters and each of their own abilities, and is set up in a cool cyberpunk Blade Runner-esque world. Each character's specialties is needed for each puzzle element in the game. Carter leads, Minoko hacks machines. Andre fixes stuff good, and Amber is your hazmat environment dude. Part of the challenge is figuring out not only which character is needed for each situation, but how to use the other characters to get that character in the spot they need to be. Playing by yourself, the game still manages to make controlling all 4 characters a cinch, by having each one assigned to each direction on the D-pad. And asking your comrades to follow you or stay put is a simple one-button affair. However, when the computer is controlling them, they do a so-so job of following you. Sometimes they just randomly stop or get stuck for no good reason, but other times they surprisingly follow you perfectly. There are quite a few glitches and flaws in the game. However, the overall experience for me has always been more positive than negative. The positives will help those who get drawn into this one overlook some of the issues the game has. The only really big problem is that in some parts of certain levels, the game can actually glitch to a game-ending degree, making progression impossible because something went wrong. I definitely get the feeling that all of Core's releases were rushed to the PS2 market. However, I try and offset the danger of a game-ruining glitch by having 3 separate saves running for the game, saving each portion in sequence. Otherwise, as in Tomb Raider, the game allows you to return to any level you have unlocked at any point, meaning you can always start the level over from the beginning, which, with the size of the levels, may completely completely demotivate you from playing the game again. The glitches don't always occur, but it is always smart to run at least 2 saves for the game, just in case. That way you don't have to start the level over again. The game's frame rate can also take drastic dives at times, usually during the action sequences, but other times just because. I've never been able to test how much this affects the multiplayer aspect of the campaign. Perhaps those who have played this game with more people can comment on that one for me. There also never seems to be enough ammo. The game does give some items here and there to refill your ammo, but the game forces you to refill your ammo at charge points, placed sparingly throughout the map. This can be a bit frustrating considering how many rounds it takes to put down enemies, and that every weapon uses the exact same ammo meter. On the plus side, should your character succumb to an enemy, it isn't game over. All the characters are respawned at the checkpoints upon dying. This gives the game a more drop-in and play feel. The only penalty for dying is having to get back to the point you were before you died. Graphically, aside from the previously mentioned frame rate issues, on a level of graphical detail, the game looks poor, even for a 2001 PS2 release. There are other second-generation PS2 efforts that leave Eden in the dust. However, where Eden shines is in its ambience and atmosphere. What the game lacks in flash and detail, it makes up for with an impeccable atmosphere. Core nailed that futuristic yet urban decay style of atmosphere. If you're not a fan of, I guess the term is tech noir style, then the cool blending of futuristic environments with rundown dilapidated ruins of old urban areas may not do much for you. Overall, the visual detail isn't terrible, but you definitely won't be playing this game for its visual quality outside of the atmosphere. On a different note, the game actually does support 16:9 anamorphic widescreen. The controls also take a bit of getting used to. While swapping characters and getting them to either follow or stay put is a simple one-button affair, most of the other mechanics feel a bit clunky to use. For example, hitting a switch requires the player to lock onto the switch with the R2 button, and then press the R1 button in order to press the switch. This can also be used to lock onto enemies during combat. The menu system also feels pretty clunky and is required in order to check your objectives or to use things like the rover and fly cam, which, by the way, are both really cool additions that help you with the puzzle solving or just scoping out new areas. The movement and aiming is the modern dual analog style. Move with the left stick, aim with the right, which will help those more accustomed to modern control schemes feel right at home. The only downside to the aiming is that the analog stick has a large dead zone, which almost reminds me of how it would feel to play a Wiimote shooter with an analog stick. Moving the aiming cursor doesn't instantly turn the camera, but you do get used to it after a while. On a similar note, character movement feels almost as if it has a dead zone as well. The characters don't start out in a full sprint whenever you hold the analog stick all the way down in the direction you are running. Each character has a bit of a wind-up, which means that it takes them a short time period to get up to full running speed. This can be a bit frustrating, especially when moving platforms are involved. There is no jump in this game, but you can adjust to it even if you'll never fully like it. This gives movement a slightly sluggish feel overall, but again, this is kind of a slower paced game with a more puzzle focus as compared to an action-based game. Overall, despite its quirks and technical problems that rear their head at times, Project Eden is a game that has always drawn me in. Its clever puzzle elements, impeccable atmosphere, and multiplayer appeal are its strengths. There was a lot of thought put into the level designs of this game, and the game shines for those who enjoy using their problem-solving skills, either alone or with friends. There is also a PC version of Project Eden, but not owning it myself, I can't comment on what the differences may be between the two versions. If you're interested in Eden, look into both versions to see which one suits your tastes the best. A flawed, but still very engrossing game. And finally at number 5 is Skygunner. If you're a fan of Star Fox 64 and Panzer Dragoon, then Skygunner will be right up your alley. While Skygunner isn't an on-rail shooter, it is a free flight game with rail shooter and perhaps even shoot 'em up mechanics. If you choose, you can play each mission in free flight mode. However, the lock-on system is one of the primary gameplay mechanics, and you will need to master it if you want to be successful. In the game, your gunner has the ability to lock onto enemies, which changes the feel from being free flight to feeling more like a rail shooter. Destroying chains of enemies also gives you special items that lock onto the enemies, similar to the lock-on systems in the previously mentioned games. With only 5 levels, the game can be seen as short, but with the extra characters to unlock and play through the game with, extra modes to unlock, and a good degree of difficulty, there is plenty of content to keep you coming back. The general gameplay is simple fun, yet still very engaging. Not quite shoot 'em up, not quite rail shooter, and not quite free flight shooter, but a good combination of all of them. Skygunner still stands out with its unique mixture of styles. If you're a fan of the niche genres I just mentioned, then you'll have a very good time with this game. The storyline features a main villain that has all the competence of Teasel Bond, and it has its own charm, told both through in-game cutscenes and hand-drawn comic book style cells. It definitely adds to the charm of the game. Graphically, I really enjoy the art direction in this game. I don't know if there's an official name for this art style other than, probably just that anime style art style. Skygunner's look reminds me a lot of games like Tail Concerto and even Mega Man Legends on the PS1. However, if there is one giant flaw with the graphics and with the game in general, it's that there is a severe amount of slowdown in this game. The slowdown won't keep you from enjoying this unique shooter, however the developers really should have spent more time trying to optimize this game to run better. The controls in the game are smooth, so long as you choose the easy control mode like I use. There is an expert control mode, but it reminds me a lot of trying to play this game with Sky Odyssey's, which I covered in part 2 of this series, control scheme. I could never get the hang of it, but saw little reason to with the ease of using the easy setup. The music is upbeat and adds to the experience nicely. Anime purist types can even turn on Japanese voices with English subtitles, in case the English voice acting doesn't do it for you. Don't let the cutesy look of Skygunner throw you off. Between the timed objectives and even the ability to run out of fuel and fail the mission, there is a good degree of difficulty to be had in this fun little shooter. If you're into that niche anime style and shooters like Star Fox and Panzer Dragoon, you will more than likely enjoy Skygunner. Aggressive Inline. Post Tony Hawk's Pro Skater's 1999 release, the extreme sports genre became one of the hottest genres around. In fact, it seemed like every extreme sport under the sun now needed its own video game. We had surfing games, razor scooter games, snowboarding games, skiing games, and most of them weren't up to the standards set by Neversoft's Goliath. However, if there was one developer that not only released games, in my humble opinion, that not not only were on par with Neversoft's releases, but in some ways even bested them, it was developer Z-Axis, known best for the Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX series, but also releasing Thrasher Skate and Destroy, which did horribly in the review scores but is appreciated by many real skaters as being the most true to skating. And this game, which is actually one of the best extreme sports games released on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. Inline doesn't seem to have the same trick modifier system Z-Axis used for Dave Mirra, but it does have some new moves that can only be done on inline skates, like the ability to skate backwards, vault over objects, or even swinging around light poles. The levels are large, and Z-Axis did away with, up to that point, the traditional timers used in extreme sports games. As you play and complete different objectives, you unlock new areas in each level, new levels, and even gain attribute points for your skater through earned experience. The level designs are reminiscent of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, where you skate around looking for characters in each level to add challenges for you to complete. The only thing is, this game actually beat Tony Hawk 4 to the market by about 5 months. But since most gamers are more familiar with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 than this game, I use it as a reference. There is even a park editor mode added for good measure, which we first saw in Street Skater 2 actually, not Tony Hawk 2. The graphics are still decent, considering this is a 2002 release for the PS2. But Z-Axis's games were usually slightly a little rougher around the edges than Neversoft's were. A bit more glitchier, the camera and controls can be kind of twitchy at times, and the mechanic where you only hold the jump button slightly before you go off a ramp instead of holding it the whole time might throw Tony Hawk veterans off. The soundtrack consists of bands like Sublime, POD, Hoobastank, and more. However, the Xbox version of the game allows you to use custom soundtracks of songs ripped to your hard drive. So if you want to play the game using your own music, that might actually be the best version of the game to get. Even if you got completely Tony Hawked out and haven't played this genre in years and have absolutely no interest in professional inline skating, this game is still a whole lot of fun to play and may even bring you back to the genre if you have long left it. Z-Axis made the best Tony Hawk alternatives, and this game is possibly their best work. Let's forget about BMX XXX, which was crappy even with the TNA scenes. And it's also one of the best extreme sports games of that whole generation of gaming. It is no wonder why Activision eventually acquired Z-Axis themselves, but then EA'd them. Bombastic. PS1 gamers might be familiar with Devil Dice, which was a devilishly addictive puzzle/insane multiplayer game that allowed up to 5 players to play against each other. I covered Devil Dice in part 3 of my 5 PS1 Games Worth playing video series. Bombastic is the by far lesser known PS2 sequel to Devil Dice. Bombastic combines the gameplay of the original Devil Dice with, I would say, Bomberman actually, in that the dice no longer just disappear from the screen when lined up with the same number of dice as the number on the face of the die. For example, lining up 6 dice with 6 face up. This now causes the dice to count down and eventually explode, hence the name Bombastic. Whereas Devil Dice's single-player mode saw gamers completing developer-designed, sometimes brain-teasing puzzles, Bombastic has replaced the puzzle mode with an actual quest mode. The quest mode tells the story of how 5 little cutesy devils want to go visit the grandfather they never knew, and sees them traversing and clearing isometric levels of enemies from a start point to a finish point. These levels can be just as challenging and brain-teasing as the puzzle mode in the original Devil Dice. The quest mode is really well thought out, but like Devil Dice, the real appeal that will keep you coming back for more are the Endless Trial and multiplayer modes. The Endless Trial is a relaxing yet incredibly addictive experience and a great alternative to the high-strung action of the multiplayer modes. The multiplayer modes allow up to 5 players with a multi-tap and are pure mayhem and fun. However, as in Devil Dice, you'll want to play this game against human opponents, as the computer AI opponents are completely cutthroat at this game and usually just mop the floor with you. If you aren't a fan of the new exploding dice addition to Bombastic, it doesn't take very long to unlock Classic Mode in order to enjoy the multiplayer mayhem with the mechanics of the original Devil Dice. If you were a big fan of Devil Dice but never knew about Bombastic, this is a must-buy, and it's actually cheaper to pick up than the original. If you never knew about Devil Dice but are looking for some addictive puzzle action and the best multiplayer experience on the PS2 you've never played, this is definitely worth looking into as well. Kinetica. Imagine taking the God of War engine and making it into a futuristic racing game in similar vein to Wipeout. No, strike that. Imagine that before God of War ever existed, Sony Santa Monica Studios released a futuristic racer in similar vein to Wipeout on the engine that would eventually become the God of War engine. Well, you don't have to imagine because it exists, and it's called Kinetica. Kinetica forgoes the typical futuristic vehicle driving elements of the genre by having you control human characters who are wearing kinetic suits. Essentially, the characters become the vehicle. As in SSX, you gain boost by performing tricks. The tricks are done by holding the R1 button and putting in movements on the same analog stick you use to steer. This takes away your ability to steer while you are doing tricks, so a lot of the strategy and risk involved is choosing the right time to perform tricks in order to get much needed boost, versus having to steer your character around the course. Straightaways and the many jumps in the game are the ideal time to perform tricks, but you will find yourself trying them at more riskier places, seeing if you can get 1 or 2 tricks off before a sharp turn for an extra little boost. This becomes a very engaging part of the gameplay. Sometimes 1 extra second of boost is the difference between a last second upset into first place and taking 2nd or 3rd place in the race. The tracks themselves are really well designed and have a ton of shortcuts and branching routes for you to find. The tracks also have nice variety to them, as you won't just be racing in futuristic cityscapes, but also organic looking environments like the Lost City level. Collecting 5 yellow crystals or 1 purple crystal gives the player a special ability like the burst attack, faster tricks, infinite boost, and etc. But for the most part, any combat elements take a backseat to the tricks to earn boost and the racing itself. Graphically, the game moves lightning fast and the tracks support a fair amount of detail with some nice lighting and water effects. However, this looks better than a lot of games released for the PS2 in 2001, but you can tell this is 2nd gen graphical tech. Yes, the engine would later go on to run the, by PS2 standards, graphical powerhouses known as God of War. But that would be almost 4 years later and a lot of no doubt tweaking. However, speed was by far the most important thing to get right, and they smashed it out of the park. The controls feel responsive most of the time. Not being able to steer and do tricks at the same time does take some getting used to, and players can even use the right analog stick as the accelerator if they don't want to use the face buttons. The only hiccup I have with the controls is that sometimes the trick system doesn't feel very responsive. You'll be holding the R1 button and moving that analog stick in every which direction you can think of, sometimes to no response from your character, or a limited or delayed response. However, it doesn't always happen and it's probably operator error. The music is the traditional electronic style first seen in games like Wipeout, and I actually really enjoy the tunes in this game. Overall, this is a really good futuristic racer for the PS2, but also a really challenging one. You only have 3 continues per race season, so failing to finish in at least 3rd place 3 times in a row means you have to start back over from the beginning of the entire season. I've never actually beaten this game in full, but partially because an old save that I had got deleted when a massive memory card I had bricked out on me. Overall, this is easily one of the best games of this type on the PS2 and one of the best offerings in the futuristic racing genre of its entire generation. F-Zero GX might be the champ, but Kinetica is still a great pickup if you're a fan of these kinds of games. The Mark of Kri. The Mark of Kri actually got a fair amount of coverage prior to its release, and it seems to have gotten a lot more attention in recent years thanks to YouTube. Even my original underrated gem video for this game I posted 8 years ago has garnered over 65,000 views as of making this video. And it has been re-released on the PlayStation Store as well. But in case you happen to have missed it, the Mark of Kri has been aptly described as Disney meets Conan the Barbarian. Its art style is reminiscent of animated Disney films, but the extremely gory elements of the game give it its muchly deserved mature rating. Kri's gameplay is a mixture of action and stealth. The levels are linear in nature, but allow the gamer to decide if they want to stealthily kill as many opponents as possible, or rush in for a much harder experience of constant fighting. Again, stealth isn't required in the game, but it's preferred if you want to make it to the end of the level. And these stealth kills are pretty awesome to watch as well. Helping Rao along the way is his trusty spirit guide Kuzo, a magical and ancient bird who also narrates the really cool hand-drawn story elements in the game, and who allows players to scout ahead in the game by landing on perch icons located in selected spots in each level. Kuzo will also occasionally hit a switch or grab an item, or even knock down a ladder for Rao to progress. Inevitably, however, you will be seen or forced into a big battle against multiple foes, and that's where Kri's unique combat system comes into play. The combat system sees Rao locking onto multiple opponents by using the right analog stick, and then having each of those enemies being assigned to square, X, or circle buttons on the controller. Pressing the buttons will then see Rao attack the enemy who has been assigned that button in the game. It was a unique attempt to innovate combat and allow gamers to take on multiple enemies at one time. However, more fluid and twitch fighting systems like those in Devil May Cry and God of War would eventually become the mainstream standard, leaving Kri's fighting system uniquely its own experience. The only other game that has ever emulated it being the, I'm sorry European gamers, this never got released overseas, sequel, Rise of the Kasai. Rao's arsenal grows beyond his trusty broadsword as the game progresses to include a bow and arrow for long-range stealth kills on all non-armored enemies, and a spear that can target up to 2 enemies at once, and even a beastly axe that can target up to 3 enemies at once and even sever them midsection. That's really cool, by the way. He even has an unarmed disarm move that even Altair would tip his hood to that is incredibly useful in taking down the heavily armored enemies in the game in one hit. The overall combat is still really fun in its own right, if not a little limited when compared to combat in games like God of War, but it still sets Kri apart from other games. The graphics have actually aged well due to the cartoon-style art direction in the game, and the controls are responsive, with the only issue that pops up most of the time being the design choice to have Rao's sword ricochet off of walls and other solid objects, which can hamper fighting in cramped spaces. The music is good and the voice acting in the game is excellent. The Mark of Kri is a game I paid $50 for brand new right after it released, and I have never regretted my purchase. Kri has a very unique mixture of storytelling, stealth, and action gameplay with its own fighting mechanics that set it apart, all bundled together in a cool animated style world. I highly recommend this game to all PS2 gamers or to anyone with access to the PlayStation Store. I've heard some people call it a classic. I just say it's a great game. Slay. Sly? S-L-A-I? Steel Lancer Arena International. I'm actually not sure how you're supposed to pronounce this game, so before the pronunciation Nazis come in and tell me that I am pronouncing the game wrong, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Steel Lancer and Crimson C2 have one thing in common. They are both PS2 exclusive sequels to exclusive games on the original Xbox. This game is the little-known sequel to the little-known Xbox game named Phantom Crash, not to be confused with the little-known Xbox game named Phantom Dust. I have a video of this game up on YouTube dating back to November 2007, which is 1 month or so after I started YouTube altogether. This is possibly my favorite mech game on the PS2, which is saying a lot because I love the Armored Core series and Steambot Chronicles. So what happens when you take the deep customization options of a game like Armored Core and put them into a simulated online world with simulated online deathmatches on simulated servers? You get the incredibly addictive formula that makes up Steel Lancer. This game makes you fight and struggle your way up the ladder on your way to being the highest ranked SV pilot in the world. Players start out by buying a basic model SV from one of the 5 SV makers and slowly try to climb their way up the ladder by earning cash for destroying as many opponents as they can in the arenas. Your payouts are based on your performance. Like Armored Core, this game is very hard to get ahead in. Even with your best kill streaks in the arena, the steep cost of upgrading your SV and the steep cost of just about everything else in the game makes getting ahead a very tough task. This game can actually be infuriatingly cheap at times, and you will be saving after everything you do and reloading your data a lot. I actually suggest using 2 of the save slots, if not all 3 of them, in order to not lose data in case you save yourself into a corner. Death can come very swiftly in the battles if you're not careful. Luckily, if you know where to look in each arena, dropships sometimes leave much needed life and ammo pickups. However, the best advice I can give you at first is to find a good camping spot to shoot your opponents from a distance, and where you can see when the items get dropped off. Cheap tactic in real online games, but one that works well against AI opponents in this game. The battles themselves are very intense, and you will often find yourself saying, just one more kill, one more before I leave. You have to balance risk versus reward. If you manage to survive long enough in each battle, you are eventually greeted with a cutscene of that class's ranker coming up the lift. Should you manage to defeat them in battle, you then become the new #1 ranker on that class. If you get tired of playing the same arena, or become the #1 ranker in all the classes of that entire server, you can move on to the next server and try your luck there. Overall, between the intense battles, the deep customization options with a million different possible combinations, stylish simulated online world, and tough as nails gameplay, this game will steal hours from you. According to the box, there is 50 hours of gameplay in this game, but with the constant reloading of data, I would say there is a lot more. I've never beaten this game because, like Kinetica, I completely lost my save data for the game when that stupid massive memory card died on me, completely putting off my will to start all over again on hold for almost 10 years. However, I've played enough of the game to thoroughly recommend it. At one time, Konami even had real online servers up for this game for up to 4 players. But even when I bought this game less than 2 years after its release, the servers had long since been taken down. There is still a 2-player split-screen battle option though. Gradius V. Perhaps you're aware of the history of beloved hardcore developer Treasure Inc. An ex-Konami team leaves Konami and forms a new company called Treasure, and then goes on to release beloved classics like Gunstar Heroes, Radiant Silvergun, Mischief Maker, Sin and Punishment, Ikaruga, McDonald's Treasure Land Adventure, Dynamite Heady, and even Wario World on the GameCube. We can forget about Stretch Panic, okay? Since they left, Konami, Treasure has become one of the most celebrated niche developers in gaming history, and arguably the best shoot-'em-up developer out there. I don't know if this 2004 release marks the first reunion between Treasure and Konami, but I do know that Konami trusted the right developer for the 5th game in their long-running and beloved Gradius franchise. Gradius starts you out with a basic slow-moving ship that you can upgrade via the upgrade menu at the bottom of the play screen by collecting power-up capsules from either destroying red enemies or strings of enemies. Players can buy speed upgrades, missiles, multiples, those little orbs that follow you and shoot alongside you, and even shield upgrades that allow you to take multiple hits instead of the usual one-hit deaths. Prior to starting the game, players get to choose which upgrade options they want. Gradius is a very tough game, and dying loses players all their upgrades, though they can recollect their multiples after they die, which comes very much in handy. The game is almost so difficult that it's actually almost easier to restart the entire game after dying once in order to rebuild your upgrades than it is to struggle mid-level without them. Treasure decided to start players out with a seemingly impossible 2 continues with which to beat all 7 levels in the game. However, 1 continue is added per hour of in-game gameplay, which is a very nice touch that will keep you playing. This is a very tough game, and even on very easy, it's not exactly very easy. At least for me, that is, as I've always sucked at shoot-'em-ups. Graphically, this game is beautiful and runs smoothly. There is even a 2-player co-op option, but I haven't tested it to see if that affects the frame rate in any way, or if it makes the game any easier or possibly even harder. The controls are incredibly responsive, which is required for games of this type, and the music fits the action nicely. If you are a shoot-'em-up fan, this should definitely be in your collection. If you're a novice like I am, be warned, this is a very hard game to learn at first, but you do start to get the satisfaction of improving through continuous play. If you're a hardcore Gradius fan who somehow overlooked this one, this is a must. You should also be on the lookout for Gradius 3 and 4, which was released first gen for the PS2 and features arcade-perfect ports for those games. If you've always liked Super R-Type more than Gradius 3 on the Super Nintendo, then be sure to check out R-Type Final on the PS2 as well. Between compilations and standalone releases, the PS2 has a spectacular library of shoot-'em-ups. Also, as a heads up, this game is a blue disc CD-based game in case your PS2 has trouble reading CD-based games. The Red Star. Before developer Acclaim went out of business, they had a very much earned reputation for releasing subpar and mediocre games, with the rare good game here and there. Near the end, though, it seemed as if they were attempting to turn their company's reputation around by finally trying to make top-quality games. One of the games announced in their new lineup was the Red Star, slated to be released on the PS2 and Xbox, with even a demo of the game on the demo disc for issue 35 of the official Xbox magazine. The only problem was Acclaim went out of business before this game was ever released, and XS Games, known best for butchering Japanese to North American ports of games, picked up development where Acclaim left off. I would have to go back and find that demo disc to fully see what gameplay and design choices were changed from the Acclaim original, as I'm not sure how much of the game retains Acclaim's original designs, nor how far along they were in development. However, the Red Star is a unique blending of beat-em-ups, Contra-style shooters, and shoot-em-ups, and is a fantastic game for 1 or 2 players to enjoy. Players can melee attack most enemies in the game, which builds up a super meter, or they can choose to shoot them with their guns. But the guns do overheat if they are used too much. The enemies have a good variety to them, and the boss battles are really well done. Players also get graded for their performance in each level, and earn points they can use to spend on much needed upgrades in between the levels. Graphically, the visuals are polished and the frame rate runs smoothly, though it has been years since I have played this game with 2 players, so I don't remember if any frame rate issues occur with an added second player. The music is also very fitting and well done, and the game controls very smoothly. The lock-on system works perfectly. There is a good degree of difficulty in the game, and there are unlockable characters and new modes of play. If you're a fan of beat-em-ups, shoot-em-ups, and Contra-style games, the Red Star is a spectacular pickup that is also much enjoyed with a friend. This game pulls off its unique blending with style and is criminally underrated. Rumble Racing. PS1 gamers might be familiar with NASCAR Rumble, which took the NASCAR license and combined it with Mario Kart's power-up gameplay and Need for Speed 3's shortcut-ridden track designs. Rumble Racing is the non-NASCAR licensed sequel to NASCAR Rumble, and contains the same high-strung, exciting gameplay of the original. All the power-ups, the shortcut-ridden tracks, and insanely fast-moving action that made the original so good, but also takes a cue from Rush 2049 and adds a stunt mode. Successfully completing stunts gives players a much-needed nitro boost and adds a whole new dimension to the racing, as players will find themselves trying to find every little jump in the track in order to earn a boost by doing tricks. Players compete in 3 cup races, like in Mario Kart, and coming in first in each cup unlocks new cups, new cars, new tracks, and even pro and elite classes. There are even some returning tracks from the original. Graphically, this game definitely has a first-gen look to it, being a 2001 release. They're not horrible, but they are far from even mid-tier even by PS2 standards. However, the game moves really fast, so you won't have a lot of time to notice and nitpick. The controls are tighter than NASCAR Rumble, but still a little loose overall, but I think that's by design. You'll be hard-pressed to even notice the music over the engine noises, and they brought back the same pointless announcer from the original. And your AI opponents totally cheat in this game. If you are a fan of NASCAR Rumble, or are just looking for an incredibly fast, fun, addictive, and unique racer for the PS2, Rumble Racing should be in your library. Even in the stiff competition of PS2 racers, it stands out as one of the best alternative racers out there on the PS2 or in general. Ugly visuals, but fast, fluid gameplay with a unique blending. Also of note, this game is also a Blue Disc CD-based game. Sky Odyssey. This game was released close enough to the PS2's North American launch to basically be considered a launch title in my book. Even if it wasn't available day one, it was released a couple of weeks later. The first thing most gamers will notice about this game, and generally the first thing mentioned in most reviews about it, is the very poor graphics. This was a first-gen PS2 game, but to call it a first-gen PS2 game isn't quite fair to the visual quality of other first-gen PS2 games. Without exaggeration, it literally looks like a high-resolution Nintendo 64 game, lighting and particle effects aside. However, speaking of launch, and speaking of the Nintendo 64, that brings me to the game that Sky Odyssey is most comparable to. If you're a fan of the Pilot Wing series, Sky Odyssey will be right up your alley. This game has a number of modes, from free flight to skywriting, and even flying through hoops if you want to. However, the adventure mode sees players flying through preset courses, hitting checkpoints, and completing objectives along the way. The game kind of reminds me of the Smuggler's Run feel, where the missions are really tough, but you always want to give it just one more try. In fact, in playing this footage, I couldn't even beat the second mission in the game. However, constant failure didn't stop me from trying again and again. This game is tough but very addictive. There are also new courses and new planes to unlock. The controls have a pretty steep learning curve at first, but they don't take long to get a handle on. And there are two control setups to choose from. The music is spectacular and upbeat, sort of RPG adventurous in nature, and really well done. If you're looking for a Pilot Wing style fix on the PS2, or are just wanting to play something uniquely different on the system, Sky Odyssey's challenging yet addictive gameplay might be what you're looking for. Space Channel 5 Special Edition. This two-game package, each one on their own standalone disc, brought two favorite Dreamcast rhythm games to the PS2 in one budget-priced package. Space Channel 5 takes its cue from games like Parappa the Rappa in combining music with essentially Simon Says style gameplay. Players play as Oolala, a swinging 1960s TV host, in a unique futuristic space setting. I guess you can say these games are generally just QuickTime event games, but the rhythm setting disguises it well. What sets these games apart, aside from the cool setting, is they are completely played by ear. Unlike Parappa, there is no meter to tell gamers the right time to input a command. You have to listen and repeat commands back in rhythm. These games test your hand-ear coordination and short-term memory skills. Special Edition combines the original Space Channel 5, which I also own on the Dreamcast, and Space Channel 5 Part 2, which was never brought over to the States. This is an incredible value for gamers, and especially Dreamcast fans who don't want to pay the absurd asking price for the import version of Part 2 on the Dreamcast. Even today, Special Edition has a very cheap fetching price online. The Dreamcast to me will always be that incredible breath of fresh air gaming needed in between the PS1 and N64 and the looming next generation of gaming. And Space Channel 5 has that uniquely Dreamcast feel to it. It isn't that the PS1 and N64 were stagnating from a development standpoint when the Dreamcast hit. It's that we almost forgot how original and zany games could be in the right development environment, and the Dreamcast was the system that allowed niche-style games to shine very brightly. I guess I would say that it wasn't that gaming needed new innovations, it's that gaming needed Sega's long absent, in the West at least, input into gaming. I'm not sure if I can properly word the Dreamcast vibe. it's just something completely unique. I guess you just had to be there in order to understand what I'm talking about. It was just something so different.
Out of control!
Don't fall off, ooh-la-la. Left, two, right, two, up, hey, hey.
Left, two, right, two, up, hey, hey!
Right, two, left, two, up, two, hey.
Right, two, left, two, up, two, hey!
Up, two, left, two, hey.
Up, two!
Had Space Channel 5 been released on any other console at the time aside from the Sega Dreamcast, the result probably would have been the exact same as this PS2 collection here. They very quickly would have slipped into obscurity. However, this is a great bargain buy for all PS2 gamers who are fans of rhythm games, and two games that through style and gameplay feel still stand out to this day. Michael Jackson even makes an appearance in both games. Footage I would love to show you if I weren't abhorrently terrible at both of these games like I am at most games. Just make sure you get both discs with this game should you buy Space Channel 5 Special Edition online.